We'll go to Russell Rotunda up on Capitol Hill on the Senate side, where joining us up there is Senator Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa and ranking member on the Finance Committee. And Senator Grassley, I want to begin where Mr. Van Hollen left off, and that's with what the president had to say on the issue of taxes, given your position on the Finance Committee. I want to show our viewers what the president said when it comes to lobbyists and the tax code and get your reaction.
Over the years, a parade of lobbyists has rigged the tax code to benefit particular companies and industries. Those with accountants or lawyers to work the system can end up paying no taxes at all. But all the rest are hit with one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. It makes no sense, and it has to change. So tonight I'm asking Democrats and Republicans to simplify the system, get rid of the loopholes, level the playing field, and use the savings to lower the corporate tax rate for the first time in 25 years without adding to our deficit.
Senator Grassley, what's your reaction to that?
I agree with the president. You know, there is an industry in this town of lobbyists and lawyers and accountants that, quite frankly, go to sophisticated ways to think up and even, can you believe it, copyright and patent certain tax principles. In fact, in a bill coming up that Senator Leahy and I've introduced, we want to do away with that patenting. But he's absolutely right. There's an industry, and then they come and sell it to Congress, and then you got an industry that benefits from it. But don't forget, you created an industry that thought this stuff up. Now, the president didn't say this, but he's calling for reducing the marginal tax rate on corporate taxes, because we're the second highest corporate tax rate all around the world, and that makes us very uncompetitive. And there is a principle of law that the president didn't express, a principle of taxation that says when you lower marginal tax rates, you broaden the tax base, and that's basically what the president is asking us to do. The only thing that I would disagree with the president on, if he's saying that to bring in more revenue, you should not be increasing taxes, particularly during a recession, but particularly if, you know, the old principle, you increase taxes, you get less of it. So if you want to increase employment, you don't increase taxes on the people that provide the jobs in America.
But the president is saying that the wealthiest Americans could sacrifice a little and take pay higher taxes in order to tackle the deficit, so that we can start to make a dent in that situation.
Well, now you're bringing up another item. What the president was speaking about there, what you quoted him, he was talking about the corporate tax rate. Now you're bringing up about the individual tax rate, and that's a legitimate point for you to bring up. And I think that we discuss that when we get out of the recession, because there is a principle that even the president agreed with in 2009, that when you're in a recession, you should not increase taxes. Because don't you remember, he ran in 2008 on a platform of increasing taxes on higher income people. But before he was sworn in 2 years ago right now, he announced, well, we're in a recession, you shouldn't increase taxes during a recession. Well, I would remind the president what he said last night. The same principle applies. Let's talk about it after we get out of the recession, because you shouldn't increase taxes while you're in a recession.
Senator, we didn't hear a lot from the president about an overhaul of the tax code. What did you make of that?
Well, that's a continuation of the discussion you and I just had, and it follows along the lines. I think the president is taking off from what his own debt reduction commission has suggested, and there you get into the same principle we talked about, the corporate tax code. We need to reduce the marginal tax rates on individuals. We need to have fewer brackets. We need to have lower brackets. And when you reduce tax rates, you can broaden the tax base. Now, just exactly which one of those you pick and choose, or do you do away with all of them? You know, that's going to have to be a point of discussion when you get down to the finite issues of just exactly what do you eliminate. But I can tell you there's a couple sensitive ones that are very difficult to deal with politically and economically. One of those deals with the charitable deduction for churches and nonprofit organizations and charitable organizations, and the other one is the home mortgage deduction.
All right, let's go to our callers here. Senator James is waiting to talk to you. He's on the Republican line in Sterling, Illinois. James, you with us?
Yep.
Go ahead, sir.
Senator Grassley, I was just wondering, what do you think about the president's comment last night about his reason that we need to improve education in the public schools?
Well, I'll tackle it from one point of spending money and another point that doesn't cost any money and is probably more important than anything that the president said. And in the last 2 years, he's said this at least 2 or 3 times, and I wish he would say it every day. He said the most important thing that we can do to further education is for parents to be more involved in the education of their kids. That education is important, that book learning is more important than television, homework is more important than television. Parents ought to make sure that the teachers' work that they send home gets done, because the teachers aren't in the home, and that weekends are not something just for relaxation. If you look at how education is in Asia, and they're running away with us on a competitive thing, particularly in science and math, you'd find out that you do a lot of studying on weekends. And we don't seem to emphasize that in this country. And I feel strongly about what the president said. I agree with him, and I wish the president would just tell me how I can help him promote that, because I'd like to. Then the second issue involves money. And I think we have to look at different costs of money spent on education around the country, and it kind of tells you that money is not a total solution to the problem of education. Look at right here in Washington, D.C., where they spend maybe $13,000, $14,000 per student. And look at what they spend in Iowa, maybe $8,000 or $9,000 per student. And wouldn't you think that if you spend more money, you get better education, you're going to have better results in Washington, D.C. than you do Iowa? Well, no. The kids don't graduate from high school here. The ones that graduate, a lot of them are functionally illiterate, and you don't find that in Sterling, Illinois, or Cedar Falls, Iowa, as an example. So I think we have to look at how we're spending the money in education and not just throw more money at it.
Well, Senator, let's listen quickly to what the president had to say about race to the top in education.
Race to the top is the most meaningful reform of our public schools in a generation. For less than 1% of what we spend on education each year, it has led over 40 states to raise their standards for teaching and learning. And these standards were developed, by the way, not by Washington, but by Republican and Democratic governors throughout the country. And race to the top should be the approach we follow this year as we replace No Child Left Behind with a law that's more flexible and focused on what's best for our kids.
Your reaction to the State of the Union. We're talking with Senator Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa and ranking member on the Finance Committee. He's up at Russell Rotunda with us this morning. Baltimore, Maryland. Eric on the independent line. Go ahead.
Good morning, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Grassley. I'd like to thank you for your service. You're one of the few Republicans I really respect in Congress. But, I mean, I keep on hearing how President Obama has spent more than any other president and stuff, but we have to look back at the reality of things when he came into office in 2008. He basically came in trying to clean up the mess. Everybody don't want to admit it, but that Bush made. Now, he bailed out the banks. He gave tax cuts to the richest 1%. You look at Dow Jones now, they're almost at 12,000. They have money. They're not investing. They're hoarding their money. They're sending their businesses overseas. And to sit there and keep on perpetuating that Obama just spent this money crazily and this, that, I mean, I don't want to hear that. That's just rhetoric and politics.
All right, Senator, before you respond, let me read a tweet who echoes that caller, saying President Obama has created more private sector jobs than Bush did. Bush had net zero job growth in 8 years and left the nation in a great recession.
Well, those statistics in that tweet are wrong, because it went from 37 million up to about 46 million, and it's back down to now about 38 or 39 million. So whoever said that Bush didn't create any jobs, they better go back and look at the statistics. And the caller from Maryland that just finished, I'd like to say that a lot of the stuff that he said I agree with, and all the fault does not rest with President Obama, but I think where President Obama gets hit legitimately is from the standpoint, and I'll quantify it, that the last 4 years have accumulated about the last 2 years has accumulated about almost $4 trillion of additional debt. Now that's just in 2 years compared to the $10 trillion that was accumulated over the previous 225 years. So, and that comes from the standpoint that a lot of the things that President Obama, maybe when he thought he ought to do them, like the stimulus bill and like increasing appropriations the last 2 years by 22%, which you can't keep up. I think he thought he was doing well, but it just did not work, and it did end up adding to a great deal to the deficit.
Here's an email, Senator, from a viewer, Joan in Randolph, Vermont, and she writes this. I noticed you said that we can't raise taxes during a recession. However, the Republicans don't want to raise taxes ever. You mentioned there's a theory that raising taxes during a recession is harmful to the economy. But there is also a theory that you don't cut spending during a recession. It seems the Republicans only want to look at one side of the equation.
Well, first of all, we would say that for a period of time, that yes, the government can spend to fill a vacuum when consumers aren't spending. And consumer spending really went down. So there was a legitimacy to that. But the point is that what's spent didn't really do what it was supposed to do, because you see, of that $814 billion that went into the stimulus package, you get to a point where only 1/2 of that went into small business, and small business creates 70% of the new jobs. So more of it should have been put into small business instead of public sector employment, because you know government consumes wealth. Government doesn't create wealth. And the other part of it was only about 3% of the $814 billion went into building roads and other infrastructure, and more should have gone into that rather than just spending the way Congress traditionally spends. And then on the taxes that the person brought up in the Twitter, I would say this, that I would be willing and consider raising taxes if it went to the bottom line. In other words, $1 raise went to a $1 reduction in the deficit. But there are several studies over the last 30, 40 years, maybe even 50 years, that show that when Congress increases taxes, it's a license to spend $1.15. Now that's the lowest figure. There's some that go up to $1.69. So I use the lowest figure of $1.15. Now that doesn't reduce the deficit by increasing taxes, that increases the deficit. And so what we have to do is make sure that the problem then is on the spending side, not on the taxing side. And that's kind of where we are. It's kind of like a dog chasing its tail. You never catch up.
Senator, on infrastructure spending and what the president had to say last night about making these types of investments, do you see middle ground there between Democrats and Republicans?
Yeah, I think so. And you're going to find that later this year in the transportation bill that comes up. And it should have come up 2 years ago. But because of the recession, and you can't increase taxes during a recession, it's just been extended from the law 5 years ago. But I think we're going to get to a point where we're going to have a major debate on infrastructure this year.
All right, let's go to Nashville, Tennessee. Catherine is joining us on the Republican line.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning.
Morning.
I just wanted to ask, well, me and my husband, we're small business owners. We own a small business. When I went to go expand my company, I put in for a grant. Never heard anything back. I can't force the government to help me out, but how am I supposed to expand my business to open up new jobs and open up new positions in my company if the government system has basically split the money every which way and is not willing to help small businesses?
I'll give you some advice the way I would handle the problem that you just stated if you were an Iowa constituent. I don't know whether you're entitled to that grant or not. I would not know until I looked into it if you were an Iowa constituent. But if you haven't contacted your congressman or senator, that congressman or senator can't get you anything that the law doesn't allow you to have. But you said you never got an answer. Everybody that's doing business with the federal government is entitled to an answer. It may not be the answer that you want, but you ought to know that you have been given fair consideration by the people that work in any program that you think you qualify for. So I would suggest that you get your congressman or senator on that point, because that's what I do for my constituents in Iowa.
Let's go to International Falls, Minnesota. Paul, on the Democratic line, you're on the air with Senator Grassley.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for taking my call. And give me a little time to talk to him here, please. And the thing of it is, why don't we take back the tax breaks to these people who've taken our jobs overseas? And that's a good question for this gentleman, because it's the Republicans that are holding the bill up.
What bill are you, Paul? What bill are you referring to?
I know what bill he's talking about.
Okay.
I can answer his question. He's talking about bills that were up over the last year that would tax income overseas before it's brought home. Now, the constituent in Minnesota asks a legitimate question. We're the only country in the world that taxes income made overseas when it comes home. Every other country taxes where it's made. Like if you got a business in Germany, you pay the Germany tax, but you don't pay the American tax. We need to change to a territorial tax system so that we're on a level playing field with every other country. Now, the other point, though, is as long as the law is the way it is right now, and we don't change to a territorial system, I want to tell the gentleman that we could change the tax law the way he wants to. And then instead of just sending manufacturing jobs overseas, you would have a lot of corporate headquarters just move up and go overseas, so you would lose jobs and not gain jobs by doing what he's advocating.
James, an independent in Lancaster, Ohio. Last phone call for Senator Grassley. Go ahead.
Yes, Senator Grassley. You touched on the tax breaks here recently as far as sending the jobs overseas and everything coming in from overseas. I think the solution to that problem is let's not have businesses overseas. Let's keep those businesses here in the United States. I am a blue-collar working-class American that actually has a skilled laborer and a college degree, but I'm forced to work waiting tables at a Waffle House just to get by and scrape by every day. I want to know when tax cuts are actually going to start coming my way. The president touched in his speech the most powerful thing I feel he said was Americans sacrifice on a daily basis to live within their means. They need a government that does the same. And I guess my question truly is, how is that not only going to apply on a figurative level in government, but also maybe on a literal level, as well as maybe a personal level from senator to representative?
Sure, I'm glad to answer your question. First of all, the tax policy we have right now was passed in 2001, and it was going to expire in 2010. It's been continued for 2 years, and that was a bipartisan agreement with the president just before Christmas. And by extending it for 2 years, you avoid getting the biggest tax increase in the history of the country without even a vote of Congress, because you would have gone back to the law it was in 2000. Now, I don't know your situation, but let me tell you that everybody that paid income tax in 2001 and ever since, if you're paying income tax, you got a tax break in the 2001 tax bill, and you're still continuing to get it.
Senator Grassley, Republican of Iowa, I want to thank you for talking to our viewers this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you, and thank you to C-SPAN for your in-depth coverage.
All right.